Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Health and Human Services has had under consideration the following legislation, instructing to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. Senate Bill 31 do pass by substitute, sent by Senator Huntsman and the 45th. Mr. President, the Senate Retirement Committee has had under consideration the following legislation, instructing to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. Senate Bill 333 do pass, Senate Bill 197 do pass by substitute, sent by Senator Black of the 8th. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Regulated Industries and Utilities has had under consideration the following legislation, instructing to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. Senate Bill 17 do pass by substitute. House Bill 475 do pass by substitute. Sent by Senator 47th. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Finance has had under consideration the following legislation, instructing to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. House Bill 661 do pass by Senator Hufstedler, the 52nd. Mr. President, the Senate Higher Education Committee has had under consideration the following legislation, instructing to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. Senate Bill 331 do pass. House Bill 432 do pass by Senator Miller, the 40th. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Economic Development and Tourism has had under consideration the following legislation, instructing to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. House Bill 354 do pass by substitute. Senator Dugan of the 30th. That concludes the order.
Secretary will read bills for the second time.
Senate Bill 74 by Senator McCune of the 29th. Court's proper standard of proof. Provide for clear and convincing evidence. That concludes the order.
It is now time for the morning roll call. Time for the morning roll call. Are there any motions to excuse? Chair recognizes Senator from the 35th. Did you? Chair recognizes Senator from the 40th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask for unanimous consent to excuse the Senator from the 29th for business outside the Capitol.
29th, without objection. Senator from the 29th will be excused. Chair recognizes now Senator from the 17th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask for unanimous consent that the Senator from the 20th be excused for business outside the Capitol.
20th, without objection. Senator from the 20th will be excused. Chair now recognizes Senator from the 38th.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to excuse the Senator from the 15th for business outside of the Capitol.
15th, without objection. Senator from the 15th will be excused. Any other motions to excuse? Senators, please signify your presence by voting the yea switch. The Secretary will unlock the machine. It is now time for our morning devotion. Time for our morning devotion. Would ask that all senators please take your seats and cease all audible conversation at this time as we are preparing the chamber for our morning devotion. It is now my distinct honor to recognize the senator from the 32nd for the purpose of leading doorkeepers. Close the chamber, please. It is now my distinct honor to recognize the Senator from the 32nd to lead us in our pledge and introduce our chaplain of the day. Senator.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now the Georgia flag. I pledge allegiance to the Georgia flag and to the principles for which it stands, wisdom, justice, and moderation. Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I would like to introduce my pastor, Nancy Hicks. She is a preacher's kid, and she is United Methodist clergy with a passion for offering Jesus' ways as an alternative way of living for Christians and for creating healthy community. Her preferred method of teaching is to present thought-provoking and often challenging information with real-life stories and asking questions of her congregation to facilitate personal growth, inclusiveness, and community. She feels this style can be a bit heavy, so she frequently sprinkles humorous nuggets in the mix. Nancy is currently serving her 20th year as an ordained United Methodist elder with a variety of experiences, such as conference center director, pastor of a small rural congregation of 45 members, as well as senior pastor in a suburban congregation of over 1,000 members. Nancy currently serves as pastor to the community surrounding East Cobb United Methodist Church and the East Cobb United Methodist Church congregation, and some of them are sitting up there. Nancy, thank you for joining us.
Mr. President and distinguished members of the Senate, it is an honor to serve you this day. And thank you to my senator from the 32nd District for creating an opportunity for this moment. How did you get here today? Now, some of us drove ourselves here. Some of us were driven here by others. We likely had a hearty breakfast or maybe a minimalist breakfast. Many of us have already been in meetings, whether in person or through electronic device. Many of us have already argued with someone, and that's okay. Perhaps this morning, we have thought of each other or our constituents or about our plans for the day that will benefit us. Perhaps we thought about or focused on those who encouraged us along the way to this point in our lives. Someone brought us to this place this day. What is it that brought you here, to this place and this moment in time? Who brought you to this place in this moment in time? Aren't we grateful? Aren't you grateful? Thinking of those people and experience that shaped me as I prepared for this moment in time, I was reminded of a song that I learned when I was a child. Now, I understand that I'm not to sing this morning, so you know who I was looking at, right? So I'm going to repeat the lyrics to you. Some of you may know this. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. These words for this song are kind of a composite of some of the words that Jesus is attributed to Jesus in the gospel. There are a couple of different places where he talks about light. One of those places the words go like this: people don't light a lamp and then put it in a closet or under a basket. Rather, they place the lamp on a lampstand so that those who enter that space can see the light. And another place, the words attributed to him are these: you are the light of the world. He's talking to people, not to himself. You are the light of the world, he says. People do not light a lamp and put it under a basket. Instead, they put it on top of a lampstand, and it shines on all the people. And he goes on. Let your light shine before the people so they can see the good things that you do. Each one of us in this room today has the light of love and grace deeply embedded in us, else we probably wouldn't have made it past birth or maybe past adolescence. Many of the experiences that paved the way for us to be in this place, in this moment, have been because of the light of goodness of others in the world. The light that creates a desire and an ability to be public servants for the good of all people, for the good of democracy, for the good of this state, the good of those with whom we agree and those whom we disagree. Friends, let your little light shine this day. Be a light for each other. Be a light in your community. Be a light in our state and for our nation and for the world. Be a light wherever you are, whatever you say, whatever you do, and especially be a light for all children everywhere and teach them that they are each one a light, so that they too can sing and live out the words to this song. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Please be kind. We need each other. Let us pray. We are grateful today for those in this room with courage to serve. We are grateful for those who have brought each one of us to this place, so that each one of us has an opportunity to be a beacon of hope and justice and good through the work of this institution. Light in our life. We ask that you guide thoughts, words, and actions of each one here, so that each one of us is an honorable light of hope in this world. Amen. Thank you.
Senator from the 22nd. We'd like to present the Doctor of the Day, and to do so, it's my privilege to recognize the Senator from the 22nd.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's my pleasure this morning to introduce our Doctor of the Day, Dr. Bruce LeClaire. He is an associate professor in the Department of Family Medicine at the best medical school in the nation, Medical College of Georgia, where he divides his time between teaching and providing patient care. He is board certified in family medicine with fellowship in faculty development and master in public health. He is also a veteran, having served 12 years in the United States Army. Even most importantly, he has been married for 30 years to his lovely wife Sheila and has a daughter, Caitlin, who is getting her PhD at UNC Chapel Hill. Although extremely busy, he is a committed community servant, doing volunteer work as medical director for the Augusta A Street Clinic, a student-run medical health clinic for homeless and uninsured, and also volunteering time for a health clinic focusing on LGBT community. Dr. Bruce LeClaire, a true servant leader for the state of Georgia. My pleasure to introduce our Doctor of the Day, Dr. Bruce LeClaire.
Oh, wow. Thank you very much. It's a distinct honor to be here, and also special that today is also Doctor's Day. I didn't realize that I was going to be able to be here for that. So I want to thank you all for all that you do for medicine and for the people of Georgia. I know that this is a big chunk of your time. I do want to try to tell you a little story about from Voltaire. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Voltaire. He was one of the 18th century philosophers who he at least had a distinct impression of what he thought about medicine. He said he tells the story of a Frenchman who got sick, and he went to Paris, where all the best medicine was, and where all the best doctors were, and all the best treatments. And they came and they all consulted on his case. They, in fact, did the treatments that were known at the times. And despite all of that, he survived. So he also said that the role of the physician is to entertain the patient while nature cures the disease. So again, I want to thank all of you for having me here. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing a student who is working with me today, Angela Holder. Angela, she's from Paulding County, right? Yes. Fourth-year medical student, and is looking to do her residency in family medicine. So again, thank you very much for having us.
Great. Let's sit down and do a picture on the staff. getting to stay, spend a lot of time. We have a special group we'd like to recognize at this time. The Secretary will read a resolution.
Senate Resolution 620 by Senator Watson of the 1st, Burke of the 11th, and Kirkpatrick of the 32nd. A resolution recognizing January 31st, 2018 as Physicians' Day at the state capitol and commending the physicians of Georgia and for other purposes. Whereas Georgia physicians are trusted leaders who have a positive and lasting impact on the health of their patients and the health of their community as a whole. And whereas physicians also critically support the health of their local and state economies through the creation of jobs with their related wages and benefits, the purchase of goods and services, and large-scale support of state and local tax revenues. And whereas physicians are committing to providing the highest level of care for their patients in spite of challenges they are facing, whereas Georgia physicians are a vital part of the community in the state, with more than 19,000 physicians licensed to practice medicine in the state and accounting for more than 205,000 total jobs. Now therefore be resolved by the Senate that the members of this body join in recognizing January 31st, 2018 as Physicians' Day at the state capitol and commending the physicians of Georgia. That concludes the order.
Is there objection to adoption of the resolution? The chair hears none, and the resolution is adopted. It is always a great honor when we have our physicians across the state come and visit us here at the Capitol, but more importantly, we value the good work of this beautiful profession as they are taking care of the citizens of our great state. And to recognize these physicians today, along with speaking to the resolution, is my honor now to recognize another physician, the senator from the 1st.
Thank you, Mr. President, and honored guest here. It is certainly my privilege and honor to have the resolution for Doctors of the Day. You know, I could talk about it's actually over 22,000 physicians in the state of Georgia, or the $1.1 billion that they and their practices commit to local and state taxes. But I sort of wanted to make it a little bit more personal. You know, I graduated in 1985 from the Medical College of Georgia, and I'll tell you, the 4 years in medical school and my residency in internal medicine, you know, we sort of block out the things that are sort of negative in our lives. And though there were multiple parts of being positive, the times that you lose sleep or you're studying late hours and you just don't quite take care of yourself, it's the self-sacrifice that we learn. But on a personal level, my son is in medical school now, and he's second year, and I will tell you the way they are teaching now is much better. The quality is much better. The instruments that they have to be able to teach are much higher quality than we had. And I tell you, the other thing that they do is much better also, and I think we should take this as a lesson. Not only do they stress the importance of taking care of yourself, whether that means exercising, getting your sleep, you know, eating a well-balanced diet. Those things are stressed to the max, and I think it does help. I think we should take heed as our session heats up over this 40 days, and I think we should do that. Certainly, it will help guard against what I consider to be the worst flu season that I have seen since I have been in practice. And I think that heeds us to take care of ourselves, and that we should use that as a lesson. We should use that as lessons that we should, as physicians, that we should be an example that we set, and that we should follow through with that. Without further ado, though, I'd like to introduce our leader from the Medical Association of Georgia, Frank McDonald, who hails from the great area of Gainesville, I might add. As a practicing neurologist, Dr. Frank McDonald.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I was here on Wednesday of last week as Doctor of the Day. I'm here today as Doctor's Day at the Capitol. I'd like to thank y'all for welcoming me and my colleagues. Last week, and I thanked y'all, and I want to reiterate it today, thanked y'all for the time you spend away from your family and your businesses to work hard to make this a better place, to make Georgia a better place for our profession and our patients. We're here today as representatives of the House of Medicine so we can put a face to the House of Medicine. So in your district, if you need somebody to come to ask an expert about issues about medicine, you'll know who to come to. And I'm here with a number of my colleagues down here and a number up here in the gallery. If y'all will stand in the gallery and say hello. And down here in the well, I have a number of colleagues as well who I'd like to introduce themselves.
Hello, good morning. My name is Dr. Tracy Henry. I'm on faculty at Emory University at the Grady Memorial Hospital site, and I'm also the vice chair of the Young Physician section of the Medical Association of Georgia. And I'd just like to thank you all for having us here today.
I'm Sandra Freihofer, private practice, internal medicine here in Atlanta. I'm also an adjunct clinical professor of medicine at Emory.
Jim Barber, orthopedic surgeon from Coffee County. Thank you.
Art Torslieri, I'm an otolaryngologist, which is ear, nose, and throat. Quick shout out to Burt Jones, he's my senator.
And I'm Dean Burt, OBGYN. Let's give these doctors a great round of applause. We appreciate them very, very much. Even though the senator from the first said that the new physicians are better than the old ones, if I interpreted that correctly. Are there any unanimous consents? Any senator wishing to rise on a personal privilege? Chair recognizes senator from the 27th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the Senate, I rise today to stand in defense and support of a fellow colleague. I was reading an editorial where they pretty much ridiculed the lack of leadership here in the Senate for the handling of the adoption bill. And they actually called out the senator from the 3rd and called him a grandstander. Well, the guy who wrote this editorial obviously doesn't know anything about the Senate, because I can count about 24 other senators do a much better job of grandstanding than the senator from the 3rd. He is a good man, an honest man, and a great representative of the 3rd District. I would like to, though, direct maybe the editor of that piece to a slogan that comes to mind, and that slogan is Kegel lead, or maybe the lack thereof. And Mr. President, before you get your panties in a wad or get your cabal after me, I'm just merely reciting a slogan. Let me tell you, there is really no leading when it comes to Kegel lead. There is only intimidation, bullying, and coercion. You see, before the committee, the Judicial Committee, met to take up the adoption bill, there was a secret meeting. A meeting that was led by the Lieutenant Governor's office, where only members of the Republican Party of the Judicial Committee were invited. And in this committee, they were instructed how the committee was going to be led and even the result of the Judicial Committee meeting. When the committee meeting convened, they shooed off the representative that authored that bill, and they replaced him with the General Counsel and Policy Director from the Lieutenant Governor's office. Well, she made sure that the commands and the orders of the Lieutenant Governor's office were fulfilled. And this isn't the first time that the Kegel lead brand of bullying, intimidating, and threatening members of the Senate. You see, back in 2010, when he tried to force down the throats of senators here in this chamber a tax increase, the hospital bed tax, there were members of this body that rejected that stood up and fought against it. There were committee chairmen that voted no for this, and their committee chairmanship was stripped from them. And the next year, in 2011, when this body convened, they rejected the Kegel lead brand when Democrats and Republicans stripped him of his power. A journalist even said that he was relegated to little more than a hall monitor. I have my own story of threats and intimidations by the Kegel lead brand when the chief of staff from the Lieutenant Governor's office came to me last year and threatened to take the knees out from underneath me if I did not put an end to the rumors of me running for governor. He said it made his boss look bad. Well, members of the press, editors, and reporters, the next time you want to write about failed leadership from this body or how the Senate continually takes second place to the House, let me remind you of the secret meetings, the deals that were made between senators for prestigious and powerful chairmanships, if they would only but let the mantle of failed leadership fall on the backs of one person, and that person is you, Mr. President. And with that, I yield the well.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 33rd.
Thank you, Mr. President, fellow senators, colleagues, friends, and y'all. Before I read my point of personal privilege, I just wanted to announce that I am not a candidate for governor of Georgia, so you can relax. But on a serious note, I want to recognize the Georgia State Retirees Association. They're in the gallery today, and they will be having their legislative reception today from 5 to 7 p.m. in the Empire Room at the Sloppy Floyd Building. If you're in the audience, please stand. Everybody, please, let's give them applause.
Chair recognizes senator from the 50th.
Thank you, Mr. President and members of the Senate. All of you are going to be a part of a test today. I read somewhere that you can catch more senators with honey than vinegar. So therefore, you see the honey on your desk today. And we are real fortunate to have members of the Georgia beekeepers. I would like to also point out that this honey came from the 50th Senatorial District, Lakemont in Rabun County. But we do have members of the Georgia Beekeepers Association with us here this morning in the gallery. Let's give them a hand and thank them for their work in this honey. they have some legislation that'll be moving through the legislature this session with the tag, the beautiful tag that you see up there. But again, we are very appreciative to the beekeepers. And there's some information in that bag also. I hope that you will take some time and read those statistics and the facts, because honeybees play a major role in agriculture in our state, and agriculture is the #1 industry in our state. Thank you, Mr. President, and I'll yield the well.
Chair recognizes Senator from the 56th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do not rise often on a point of personal privilege, but I am compelled to do so today. This is hallowed ground in our Senate chamber. I hope, like each one of you, when you walk through the doorway, you are still in awe and inspired by the great responsibility that each one of us has to serve in office. We also have a responsibility to come each day and be professionals. We have the responsibility to have a certain decorum here in this chamber. If someone wants to run for a higher office and wants to schedule a press conference, then do so outside with the press accordingly. But this is sacred ground. And from this point forward, no matter what you're running for or who you are supporting, Senator from the 27th who just left, it's time to all be senators and rise above political rhetoric. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the will.
Chair recognizes Senator from the 8th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I come to invite you all to come down to the depot tonight and join the Valdosta Lowndes County delegation, along with a lot of our constituents, and the annual Valdosta Lowndes County Bird Supper. Come down and get you a good mess of quail. I think you'll really enjoy it.
You have a consent calendar of privilege resolutions that is before you. Is there objection? Without objection, the consent calendar privilege resolutions are therefore adopted. Are there any motions to withdraw or commit? Chair recognizes Senator from the 52nd.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would ask unanimous consent to withdraw Senate Bill 359 from the Insurance Committee and commit it to Health and Human Services, and both committee chairmen are in agreement.
Secretary will read the caption.
Senate Bill 359 by Senator Hofstadter, the 52nd, and others, a bill entitled an act to amend Title 33 of the OCGA relating to insurance so as to establish standards for carriers and health care providers with regard to payment under a managed care plan and the provision of emergency medical care and for other purposes. That concludes the order.
Is there objection? Without objection, I think committee chairs are in agreement with moving this bill out of insurance and placing it in Health and Human Services, and without objection, the bill will rest in Health and Human Services. We're now ready to move on to the general calendar. Secretary will read SR 502.
Senate Resolution 502 by Senator Gooch of the 51st and others, a resolution encouraging the Congress of the United States and federal agencies to do all within their powers to develop policies and funding sources to help bring high-speed broadband access to rural America and for other purposes. That concludes the order.
Chair recognizes Senator from the 51st.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senators, I rise today to bring attention to you an important resolution that is before us. As you all know, for the last 2 years, this chamber and this body has led on the very important issue of broadband access for rural Georgia. It's not only a problem here in Georgia, but it's a problem in most of our states, if not all of our states across the country. Last night, you heard our president give the State of the Union address where he has identified the need to help spend more money in our country and infrastructure, and I believe he wants to allocate $1.5 trillion toward that effort, and he's going to ask our Congress to help come up with some ways to do that and to fund that. Infrastructure also includes high-speed internet service. We've spent 2 years on this topic here in Georgia, and I can tell you without a doubt, access to high-speed internet is going to be critical for future economic development opportunities, telehealth, education, and other things in our community. So with this resolution, all we're doing is encouraging our Congress to look for ways to develop policies and funding opportunities to help our small rural communities across our country. Mr. President, if there's no questions, I'll yield the well.
Chair recognizes the majority leader, Senator from the 41st, for minority leader for question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Yield?
Yes, sir.
Senator, you mentioned that we've looked at this for the last couple of years. Is there any state funding dedicated, or have you ever seen any way that the state could financially assist in the expansion?
I believe there will be opportunities for us to discuss that in the next few weeks. We have a couple of pieces of legislation coming out of the Senate, and there are some in the House as well that will address some of those issues. And we do anticipate using some state dollars to help leverage federal funds as well. Yes, sir.
Thank you. And if Senator Further Yield, do you, in your recommendation, have any vision on how this might be accomplished? Are you thinking that possibly general funds would be allocated to help in the expansion of broadband in states, or do you see possibly the federal government requiring some type of fee or something that would go and be dedicated to this purpose?
I don't anticipate any new fees to be leveraged at this time, but I do think we'll have to look at existing revenues, and we'll also have to look at what the federal policies are going to be. And we're in communication with the Secretary of Agriculture's office. In fact, I'll have a phone call with one of their employees this afternoon about this topic. So I'll give you more information when that piece of legislation comes to the chamber. I don't have the details of that completely written out yet.
Senator Further Yield,
I will.
You referenced the Secretary of Agriculture. so you know the cabinet member who is Secretary of Agriculture, and you think he's responsive to Georgia's concerns?
I can't speak to what he knows or what his actions will be, but I look forward to that conversation with his staff today so we'll further understand what their intentions are in the future.
Senator from the 22nd, you wish to speak? Okay, no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Chair recognizes Senator from the 22nd this time to speak to the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today in support of this resolution because, as we know, for communities to basically survive in this time and age, we're going to have to be digitally connected. As was pointed out just on a video just a couple of days ago, the creation of telemedicine can be instituted to assist in health concerns throughout this state and also through rural parts of our nation. So perhaps as we may wait for Medicaid expansion, the use of telemedicine can prove to be an adequate stopgap measure in that. But that cannot take place without proper broadband access. But I also want to point out that this resolution shows two key items. And one is that there are many times where the private sector does need help to step up, whether it's through direct investment, through tax credits or tax incentives. Government action can be a good thing. And that is an important acknowledgement. Second, when we have the conversation about regulating these industries that will receive money, once again, however they receive it, to assist us in developing broadband, when we have the conversation 5, 10 years from now about free markets, let's don't forget that there never was an exact free market. The government and the private sector played a role together in this endeavor. And that's an important acknowledgement, that the government can play a positive role to help communities, to help people when that help is needed. Exactly what we're doing today. And that is a good first step acknowledgement. Mr. President, I yield for any questions if there are any.
No questions, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Does any other senator wish to speak for or against the resolution? Is the objection agreed in the Porter Committee which fail to pass the bill? Chairs none. Porter Committee is agreed to. Shall the main question be now put? Are the objections? Chairs none. Main question is ordered. Shall this bill now pass? Question on the pass of the bill. All those in favor of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed, no. Secretary, unlike the machine. On the passage or the adoption of the resolution, the ayes are 50 and the nays are 0. And this resolution, having received requisite constitutional majority, is therefore adopted. Secretary will read Senate Bill 257.
Senate Bill 257 by Senator Heath the 31st, a bill entitled enacted in Chapter 1 and Title 4 of the OCGA relating to general provisions relative to animals so as to provide for consultation with the veterinarian employed or approved by the Department of Agriculture prior to the filing of criminal charges for cruelty to animals in certain instances and for other purposes. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Agriculture and Consumer Affairs offers the following substitute to Senate Bill 257, a bill titled an act amend Chapter 1 of Title 4 of the OCGA relating general provisions relative to animals so as to provide for consultation with a veterinarian employed or approved by the Department of Agriculture prior to the filing of criminal charges for cruelty to animals in certain instances and for other purposes. That concludes the order.
Chair recognizes Senator from the 31st.
Thank you, Mr. President. I bring before you today for your consideration Senate Bill 257. Very short, simple bill. I'm sure you have all read it or have the opportunity to read it. But generally, what this bill seeks to do is to get a trained professional involved as soon as possible in the case of possible violations of the criminal code relative to animal husbandry of cattle, swine, goats, and sheep. For those of you that don't know, swine is pigs. The decision to whether or not the criminal conduct has taken place continues to remain with law enforcement. In fact, some of our law enforcement has actually requested this assistance. It gets the state vet involved earlier instead of later. In almost every case involving animal cruelty, the state vet gets involved before the case is resolved anyway. Now, I understand that some of you got an email about this last night, and I wanted to address the 5 points in that email. Some claim the bill may cause a detour of justice. Actually, this bill does right the opposite. This gets a trained professional involved at the earliest possible time. There was a mention of need to train law enforcement. This resolves that issue and makes a professional available to them promptly. There was a claim that it would be hard to enforce and adhere to. Help is only a phone call away. And then there was a question about who will pay. Today, as will be with the adoption of this bill, the state pays for the state veterinarian. And as I said earlier, the state vet almost always gets involved anyway. And then finally, the question of will these state vets or appointees be available 24/7, and the answer is yes. So with that, Mr. President, I will yield to any questions or take my seat. I will point out that this was brought to me by the Georgia Cattlemen's Association and the Georgia Farm Bureau.
You do have a couple questions. Chair recognizes Senator from the 45th.
Was Senator Gill?
I do.
Senator, is it true that the senator behind me told me I had to be as sweet as the honey that's on my desk today?
He's big on his honey.
Senator, would you further yield?
I will.
Senator, in all seriousness, is it not true, you may not know this, but I was a member of the Georgia Cattlemen's Association and raised Simmental cattle for 25 years and was also a member of the American Dairy Goat Association for many, many years. Is that not true? I've talked a little bit about that with you.
Yes, ma'am, you have.
Would you further yield?
I will.
Senator, I agree with your bill and support your bill and will vote for your bill. But one of the lingering questions that we've had from last session is an issue that's very controversial, pet land, and that is the sale of puppies from puppy mills. And I just want to make sure that when you're opening up this code, that we are not getting into that controversy that we're sticking to the subject matter of goats and cows and livestock and barn animals.
It's even more narrow than barn animals. This very specifically deals with cows, pigs, goats, and sheep, nothing else. Thank you. I knew I had one more.
Chair recognizes Senator from the 41st for a question.
Senator Yield.
I yield to the minority leader.
Thank you. What's the rationale for the list that you comprised? For instance, you put this protocol where you have to get the veterinarian to approve for cows or for animals, I believe, but not for chickens or other animals. How did you decide on your animal list?
We worked very closely with the Department of Agriculture in establishing this list. In fact, if you, let me just look here and be sure. Yeah, well, actually, some of the earlier conversations, it was not that narrow, and working with the Department of Agriculture, we narrowed the list down to these 4.
So you would have a different standard. You wouldn't, if a sheriff or a prosecutor saw someone abusing chickens, they wouldn't have to get the vet, but if they did cows, they'd have to get a vet to
Chickens
approve.
would not be covered under the provisions of this language.
Thank you. Senator, further yield, do you have any concern that, right now, if someone sees an act of animal cruelty happening, a sheriff or a law enforcement official, they could charge someone and prevent further cruelty from going on, or what they perceive as cruelty until it's adjudicated? Do you have any concern that your bill will cause them not to be able to intervene, that by the time they make a call or go get a veterinarian, whatever actions will have either continued to the detriment of the animal, or that the actual offense may be covered up, or in some way the lines of right and wrong might be blurred for the sake of justice?
I think the key word in your question there was perceived, and this is to help resolve that issue. If there is a perceived act of animal cruelty, then the best thing to do is to get someone knowledgeable about that subject area on site as soon as possible, and that's what this provides for.
Thank you, Senator. Is it not true that presently a sheriff or his deputy, and sheriff's usually elected in the county, or other district attorney who's elected, some law enforcement official, representative of the people, would make a decision to charge an offender of animal cruelty, that those district attorneys and sheriffs would be responsive to the citizens in their district, and that if they repeatedly or habitually made false charges or inappropriate charges, they would suffer the consequences? Is that not true in the way it is right now?
I would hope that would be the case.
Senator, further yield.
Yes, sir.
Did you have in committee, in the Agriculture Committee, did you have or bring forth cases that someone has been inappropriately charged with a crime of cruelty?
No, sir. That's part of the problem that we'd like to resolve with this. As you know, if someone erroneously charged you with an act of animal cruelty, and the newspaper and the news media picks that up and publicizes it, and you're later found to be not guilty, you have already suffered great harm, and so that would be one of the benefits of.
Does the Senator, have you researched and seen how many cases of animal cruelty in Georgia were brought last year, and how many of them were dismissed as improperly brought or wrong?
I know that there were some. I can't give you any numbers because I don't know the numbers, but one is too many.
Thank you, Senator.
Chair recognizes Senator from the 40th for a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Gentlemen, yield.
I do.
Senator, one thing I just think we need to clear up, based upon the way this is written, and what the concern, I believe, was from some folks about a delay of having to get a veterinarian involved. The way I read the bill is the law enforcement must consult with a veterinarian. And, for example, the law enforcement officer came back with a series of pictures of what one of these animals looks like. I think the veterinarian doesn't actually have to physically go out there. He can tell right then and there probably if an animal's been abused, could he not? He or she could not?
I would have to agree that there certainly could, sometimes pictures are clear, obvious, and if that's the case, then they would immediately try to assist that animal.
Would you further yield?
Yes, sir.
I know, for example, when you see these situations on TV, on the news, when you get the news clips, I mean, they're showing these, well, I'll say horses are the ones I think of most, and you see what they look like. Even a layperson can tell pretty much at that point that there's been a problem. So, again, I just want to emphasize that it isn't necessary under this legislation for a veterinarian to have to go out on every particular alleged animal cruelty if they have other evidence that they can view from the law enforcement officer that would help them make a determination. Is that not true?
I think that's true, but I will add to that and say that I think that all of us are very concerned about cruelty to animals. And I would say that a vet that was aware of animal cruelty that wasn't willing to respond and help that animal out doesn't deserve to be a vet.
Final question?
Yes, sir.
And again, I want to reiterate, you said you had several organizations that came to you on this bill, particularly the Farm Bureau is the one that jumps out at me that are very much in favor of this particular legislation.
That's true.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 6th for a question.
Will the senator yield?
I do.
Senator, just to follow up on what the questioning that we just heard, in terms of whether or not a veterinarian actually has to go out to the scene or not, my question is more, before a law enforcement individual could actually file charges, would they have to have the expert opinion of the veterinarian before moving forward?
They would have to consult with a vet, but this, you know, if they consult with a veterinarian and the veterinarian says, you know, this is a normal state for this particular situation, I suppose that law enforcement could go ahead and file those charges, but in other words, it doesn't prevent the filing of charges. It just requires them to consult a professional that's trained in that area before filing charges.
Will the senator further yield?
I will.
In terms of the specific areas with respect to the veterinarians you've listed, one was veterinarians actually employed by the Department of Agriculture, correct?
The state veterinarian.
Secondary was an approved list by the Department of Agriculture, correct?
An accredited veterinarian approved by the commissioner.
In terms of approved by the commissioner, does that list currently exist?
I can't answer that question, but I will go out on the limb and say that I firmly believe that the state veterinarian has a great network across the state and is very aware of many veterinarians, and if he got a call in the middle of the night, then he would know pretty quickly who the closest vet would come to mind, but this does not prevent any veterinarian from applying to be added to the list.
Will you further yield?
Sure.
But the fact of the list itself, the list does not exist currently, correct?
There is currently a list of licensed veterinarians in the state of Georgia.
I understand the license part. Will the senator further yield?
Sure.
In terms of who actually pays for the veterinarian to come out or to confirm or deny with respect to the requisites of the criminal offense, understanding that the state veterinarian may not be paid separately or privately, but if it was a local veterinarian that has to come out and actually conduct some kind of inspection, who actually pays for that vet visit or that expert opinion?
The question is a bit technical, but I would say that if Dr. Cobb ask a certain vet to go respond to a situation, then Dr. Cobb would be responsible for those fees,
So the
or the state.
So the Department of Agriculture would be on the hook for that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
As they are today.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Senator from the 33rd for a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the senator yield?
I do.
You might have gone over this, but I was outside talking with constituents, but are the veterans called out for questionable alleged abuse or obvious abuse, or for every case of alleged abuse?
It would, this legislation would require.
And the reason I'm asking that, I'm just thinking in terms of monetary costs that might be occurred by calling
Yes, sir.
them out.
This would only occur before filing of criminal charges. Criminal charges has to be filed by law enforcement, so this just offers that resource to that local law enforcement.
No further questions, Senator.
I urge your favorable support of Senate Bill 257. Thank you.
Questions on the adoption of the committee substitute. Is there objection? Without objection, committee substitute is adopted. Does any other senator wish to speak for or against the bill? Is there objection? Agreed to report of committee which fail pass the bill. Chairs none. Report of committee is agreed to. All those in favor of the bill vote aye. Those opposed no. Secretary and lock the bill machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 38 and the nays are 14. And this bill having received requisite constitutional majority is therefore adopted. Chair recognizes the majority leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate stand adjourned until 10 o'clock a.m. on Thursday, February the 1st.
We'll read the announcements.
Rules Standing Committee only will meet upon adjournment in 450 of the Capitol. Insurance and Labor will meet at 1 p.m. and 3:10 of the CLOB. Public Safety will meet at 1 p.m. in MES 1. Transportation will meet at 2 p.m. and 3:10 of the CLOB. Education and Youth will meet at 3 p.m. of 450 of the Capitol. Finance will meet at 3 p.m. in MES 1. Judiciary will meet at 4 p.m. 307 of CLOB. That concludes the order.
Any other announcements? The majority leader has moved that we stand adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. All of those in favor will say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes clearly have it. We stand adjourned.